Hey everyone, today I'm gonna give you a crash course on HTML and CSS. And you might be asking yourself, hey wait, isn't this a data science channel? Which is a fair question. Well, yes, this is a data science channel, and that's why I'm not going to take you all of the way to the level of a professional front-end developer. But having basic knowledge of this subject has several benefits for a data scientist. One, as a data scientist, you are constantly interacting with the web. Your company might have a website, you might join a company that develops a web application, and so on. And it will be awesome to be able to better communicate with the front-end devs of your company. Also, understanding how the web works will greatly enhance your web scraping skills. And finally, you will be able to build a basic website in case you need to, for showing project of yours or just for fun. Now, this tutorial is going to be built around an example project. We are going to build a small, yet beautiful website dedicated to how cute frogs are. Now, if you don't know what HTML is, or Hypertext Markup Language, it's like the skeleton of a web page. It allows us to determine which content comes after which and what pieces of the page contain other pieces within them. This is where you write your text and give the page its very initial structure. CSS, or cascading style sheets, are built around the elements of an HTML and makes them more visually appealing. They also provide more advanced ways to organize the page, but we will get to that. To begin, we need to open a directory for our project. Within it, place a folder for your homepage called index, which is a traditional name for it, and another folder for each additional page in the website, and last one folder for the images. Each page's directory should contain a file for the HTML and a file for the CSS, including the index. The image folder should have a subdirectory for each page and another one for general images that are used across multiple pages. HTML is built from tags. Each tag has a name that is related to its specific purpose. On this lesson, we will get familiar with lots of them. Right now, just know that each tag opens with brackets and the tag name and has content if needed before it is closed using another pair of brackets afterwards. Each web page has a similar initial structure. This line tells the browser that we are using HTML, which makes sure it is rendered properly. This is the HTML tag that indicates the root of the web page structure. All other elements will be included within it. The head tag is the first element within the HTML element, which makes it its first child element, and the HTML tag is the parent element. We use it to tell the web browser important information it needs to know to present the page properly. More on that soon. Inside, we have the title of the page. It won't appear anywhere in the page, but that's how the web browser will call the page. The body of the page contains all of the elements that the user who visits the site will actually see. H1 tags are for main titles, and paragraphs tags are for, paragraphs of text. When we run the page in the web browser, it doesn't look like much. We will soon change that. Currently, the structure of the page is as follows. We have the root of the page, which is the HTML tag. It contains two child elements, the head and the body. The head element's child is the title tag, and the body's children are the H1 title tag and the paragraph tag. As we develop our page further, this tree will grow deeper and wider. To let the browser know that it should apply the instruction in the index.css file to the index.html file, we need to connect them. To do that, we go to the head element and add a link tag, which links our CSS file. We have to specify a relation, which is the fact that the link is linking to a style sheet, and the address of the file as a hyperreference. The concept of providing arguments to the tag inside the opening brackets will return again and again, so get used to it. It's like providing arguments to a function in Python. Put your background image, whatever you have chosen, in the general image subdirectory. Then go to your currently empty index.css file and add the line body with curly brackets. Every instruction within the brackets will be applied to this element. To it, add a background image instruction. Add to it the URL command with a semicolon at the end. Inside the URL command, put the relative path to the background image. Now, we got a stunning background for our website. To design the general structure of the page, let's first remove all texts so we can concentrate on the structure. We will bring it back later. For now, it's time to introduce the concept of grid. The CSS grid is often presented in CSS courses after many simpler forms of page structure methods, but I found it to be so useful compared to them that I think it's better to teach it instead of them. The CSS grid allows you to divide an element to squares of different sizes and place a child element in each of those squares. The parent element is called the container, and to define the body as the container, set the display option to grid. To structure the grid, use the command grid template areas. This command allows you to give names to different parts of the container and decide which part goes where. Here, the header will be at the top of the page, the sidebar at the side of it, and the main part at the bottom. So now the grid looks like this. But I want the header part to be shorter, which is why we need the grid template rows option that tells the grid how to split the space between the rows. Specifically, I want the first row to be 10% and the other one to be 90% of the space. Also, add a width and height argument that are set to 100 VW, which means 100% of the screen width, and 100 VH, which means 100% of the screen height, respectively. This tells the body to spread across the whole screen. Now, our grid looks more like this. Of course, we need to create those elements in the HTML, within the body tag, which is the container. Inside the body, add 3 div elements. Div elements create separate sections of the content on the page. Give each div a ID label, according to the structure we defined in the CSS file. ID should identify a specific element and allow us to customize them specifically on the CSS file. Now, back in the CSS file, select the 3 elements we just created and give them a temporary color that will help us visualize the structure on the page. The 4 numbers are the red, green, and blue values of the color and the transparency of it, ranging from 0 to 1. Now, connect them to the grid using the grid area command with the corresponding area name from what we defined in the container. Now, our site looks like this, which looks good to me. You can erase the colors now. Let's add a proper title to our page. In the header element, add an h1 tag and write your title within it. Also, enclose a word with the span tag, which allows you to give a unique ID to a specific part of the text. We will use it in a second to give this word a different color than the rest. In the head element, add a link to Google Fonts. This will allow you to get more aesthetic fonts from Google. You can choose a font on Google Fonts and copy-paste the link from there here. In the CSS file, open a selector for the h1 tag and the ID of the word you want to target individually. Then, add a font family, which lets you specify the font for the text and the fallback font in case the primary font is not available. Add a color and the font size. Add a command that centers the text within its parent element, which in this case is the sidebar element. And finally, set the padding to 0. I will explain in a second what padding is and what margin is, but before that, let's give the other word a different color. Now we have a nice looking title. Now let's talk about padding, border, and margin, which are three properties each element in the HTML file has. It's transparent by default, but each element also has a border which encapsulates it. The padding is the distance between the element and its border. It can be different in each direction. The last concept to cover is the margin, which is the distance from the border to other elements' margin. To add images to the page, let's first add a grid container for it inside the main element. Then, add an inner div for each image. Give them a unique ID and a shared class. Classes provide a way to target a bunch of elements in CSS that share the same functionality. Here, for example, we want to style all the div elements of the images in the same way, so we give them the same class. Therefore, we can style them in a single CSS selector without affecting other div tags. Over the CSS file, declare the grid container and make it take 80% of the parent element, which is the main part of the page we defined earlier. Set the margin on the top and the left to values that look good to you. Finding these numbers is a matter of trial and error. And declare that this element is a grid container. Finally, define the layout of the images in an artistic and interesting way. Pause the video to look further into this example. Now, add 8 images of frogs, or whatever else you want, to the index images folder with indicative names. Over at the CSS file, make a class selector for the images, using the dot indicator, which means we are styling a class. Make sure the images will be positioned in the center of the grid square, and that they will be stretched to cover it if they are too small, or will be cut down if they are too big. Make them a bit transparent. We will use it in a minute to create a cool looking interactive animation, and set the transition time to that interactive animation to 1 second. Again, I will explain soon. Now select the same image class again, but now add the hover keyword. It tells the page what to show when you hover over the element with your mouse. When we do, we want the image to be fully solid again, and apply a contrast filter that will make the colors more vibrant. The transition into this change when we hover will take 1 second, and out of it also 1 second, as we defined before in the non-hover section. Finally, it's time to add the images. For each image, select it by ID and add the relative path to its location. Now, connect it to the grid using the grid area keyword. All of this work results in a stunning gallery. There is one image, though, that is not positioned correctly on the page, and we should shift it so it won't be cut off. To do that, change the background position of the specific image to exact percentiles on the x-axis and y-axis. The styling statements on the ID selector overrides one on the class selector, which in turn overrides tag selectors like the h1 or body. Now our gallery is perfect. Our next order of business is to add a sidebar for navigation to other pages on the website. On the HTML file, in the sidebar element, place a bunch of A tags, which are used for linking. Each of them should contain a class name for a sidebar link, an address for the page's HTML file that it links to, and a text for the link that the user will press on. On the CSS file, we have to make some additional declarations. First, turn it into a flexbox. A flexbox is similar to a grid, but it only has a single dimension. It helps us organize a row of elements or a column of them. Set the direction of the flexbox from the default row into a column, and the justify content declaration, which controls how the browser distributes space between and around content items on the flexbox. To set it to space around, which distributes the element of the flexbox evenly in the space of the parent element. To center the links horizontally, set align items to center. Now, let's style the links text themselves. Make a selector for the class of the links and another one for hovering animation, as we have seen before. Now, set the font and use the text decoration statement set to none to remove the line that is usually underneath the links. Set the font size, the color, and the time it takes for the hovering animation to fade away. Set the hovering animation to different color and time, and we are done. Now, we have a functioning sidebar navigation. Feel free to play with our website to make it even more visually appealing. And this is it, guys. This concludes our crash course into HTML and CSS. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And if you want to get better at front-end development, there is much to learn. I would suggest taking a Code Academy course on JavaScript, which along with HTML and CSS is the basis to modern front-end development, and watching some tutorials of complete website front-end design on YouTube. And, just build stuff yourself, exploring the documentation for CSS and HTML along the way. I hope you had a good time, and thank you for the view. And if you like my teaching style, please subscribe to get notified on new videos I release. This means a lot to me. See you next video, and goodbye.